He stands by the altar, heart pounding, as the stallion he sold for sacrifice rips free from the priest's ropes. In that instant, he fears the same creature he condemned is the only force that can save him from the violence closing in. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Baltus Harrington was a man whose name stirred awe across the countryside. Born into an influential family, he inherited more wealth than most could imagine. His sprawling estate boasted manicured gardens, marble columns, and ornate stables that shone like polished gold in the afternoon sun. Yet beneath the opulence and refinement lay an unyielding heart, for Baltus seldom acted out of compassion. He commanded his workers with an iron fist, dismissing their concerns as trivial nuisances. Whenever one encountered his hard stare, the feeling was akin to brushing against a cold wall. His word was law, and no one dared question it. Locals whispered that his fortune had been amassed through cunning deals and questionable favors. Some even said that his glare alone was enough to stop a galloping horse in its tracks, though none had ever tested that rumor willingly. Among the many treasures that Baltus possessed, none shone brighter than his prized stallion, Stormcaller. Dark as midnight, with a mane like spun silk, Stormcaller was swift enough to outrun the wind. Baltus adored the horse's raw power, parading him at festivals and competitions to display his own status. No champion had ever proven Stormcaller's equal in speed or endurance, yet despite his admiration, Baltus's affection for the stallion was neither gentle nor nurturing. He refused to let anyone else ride the horse, fearing that careless hands might diminish his value. Stable boys whispered that Stormcaller's eyes often reflected sadness, for he lived a life of discipline without genuine warmth. But no one dared voice such thoughts aloud. Rumors spread of him whinnying at night, lost in darkness. Late one autumn, an unexpected visitor arrived at Harrington Manor. Brother Zephram, a traveling missionary dressed in simple robes, brought news of a ceremonial sacrifice to honor a regional deity believed to protect harvests. He approached Baltus with reverence, explaining that each landowner was expected to offer something valuable as tribute. Baltus showed little emotion at first, mildly intrigued by such an ancient ritual. However, when Brother Zephram quietly added that sacrifices of fine horses were particularly esteemed, a cold gleam entered Baltus's eyes. He imagined the prestige of presenting Stormcaller, the stallion revered for his flawless lineage. Though the notion was grim, the idea of impressing powerful figures during this ceremony tempted Baltus more than he cared to admit. He sensed an opportunity grand to dismiss lightly. Baltus was not a man prone to sentiment, yet even he felt a slight twinge of conflict. Stormcaller had been his trophy, the living embodiment of his triumphs. To hand the stallion over to a sacrificial rite meant severing the one bond that truly mattered to him, however superficial. Still, the promise of recognition outweighed all else. Baltus reasoned that Stormcaller's sacrifice would elevate his standing among wealthy peers, opening doors he had long coveted. Without hesitation, he summoned his most trusted stableman, Corvin, to prepare the horse for travel. Corvin cast a wary glance at Baltus, sensing the cruelty in his master's decision, but he dared not protest. The order was clear. Stormcaller would be delivered by dawn. Outside, a cold wind seemed to echo the horse's sorrow. Before sunrise, Corvin led Stormcaller from the stable. The stallion moved with reluctant grace, as if sensing that his fate lay on a grim path. Streaks of pink and orange lit the horizon, casting a strange glow across the courtyard where Baltus waited. He stood silent, his expression set in stone. A group of men hired for the journey loaded supplies onto a wagon, ignoring Stormcaller's anxious snorts. Brother Zephram reappeared, offering a brief nod of approval. It was clear the ritual demanded punctuality. Baltus merely turned away, gesturing for them to depart. No prayers, no final words. The only acknowledgement was a curt nod. Stormcaller's ears flicked back, and for the first time a flash of defiance glimmered in his eyes. Pawed at the ground, refusing surrender. Hours later, the caravan reached a rugged clearing far from town. A makeshift altar of stone stood at the center, adorned with tokens and charms hung by earlier visitors. Thick incense wafted in the chilly air, stinging the eyes of those unaccustomed to its bite. Brother Zephram and several acolytes busied themselves with preparations, uttering prayers and arranging ceremonial knives. Stormcaller was tied to a post, his muscles twitching each time the acrid smoke billowed his way. Corvin watched from a distance, discomfort etched across his face. He did not believe in barbaric rites, but defying Baltus was unthinkable. As the chanting grew louder, Stormcaller let out a sharp neigh, as if protesting the injustice that closed in around him. They saw sorrow in his eyes, wordlessly pleading. Brother Zephram signaled for silence, raising his hands toward the sky. The acolytes ceased their chanting, and the entire gathering went still. Corvin clenched his jaw, feeling a pang of guilt. Baltus stood apart, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Stormcaller with a distant detachment. A hush fell over the clearing as Zephram recited a litany of invocations. Then, in a solemn tone, he beckoned the stallion closer. 2 acolytes moved in, untying Stormcaller and guiding him toward the altar. The incense thickened, swirling in ghostly patterns around the horse's flank. Stormcaller flared his nostrils, muscles tense as if preparing to bolt. Yet the ropes binding him were strong, leaving him only a single desperate option: to fight or submit to fate. In that moment, Stormcaller's heart thundered fiercely. Suddenly, a gust of wind tore through the clearing, scattering embers from the incense braziers. Sparks danced in the air, and Stormcaller seized the distraction. With a powerful jerk, he reared up, kicking one acolyte aside before the ropes could tighten fully. Shouts erupted as onlookers scrambled for cover, terrified of the stallion's sudden burst of defiance. Baltus watched in shock, momentarily frozen. Stormcaller twisted free of a second acolyte's grip, hooves crashing against the stone altar with a thunderous crack. Brother Zephram yelled for calm, but panic consumed the gathering. Stormcaller bolted, galloping past the stunned crowd and disappearing into the dense forest beyond. Corvin gasped, uncertain whether to chase him or remain loyal to Baltus's command. Baltus's face contorted with rage, eyes blazing like feral embers. Riding an unused horse from the caravan, Baltus led a small group into the forest in pursuit. The underbrush was thick, and fallen branches crunched beneath hooves. Sunlight barely pierced the canopy, casting elongated shadows across gnarled roots. Despite his fury, Baltus pressed forward, intent on recapturing Stormcaller at any cost. Every so often, they found fresh tracks or broken foliage, evidence of the stallion's flight. Corvin trailed behind, torn between pity for the horse and loyalty to his master. Each time Baltus cursed the useless beast, Corvin felt a pang of regret. He knew Stormcaller's escape might mean worse punishment upon capture. Still, a secret part of him prayed the stallion would outrun them all, never to be caught. In tones, Corvin whispered pleas for Stormcaller's freedom. As night fell, the search became treacherous. Torches illuminated only narrow slices of the forest, revealing shifting eyes and rustling foliage. More than once, Baltus nearly lost his temper at the men he deemed too slow. But in truth, the stallion had vanished without a trace. Realizing they risked injury in the darkness, Baltus finally ordered them to make camp. He seethed by the fire, replaying the scene of Stormcaller's escape with mounting anger. Brother Zephram's ceremony lay in ruins, and Baltus's reputation would suffer if the horse remained missing. Far away, Stormcaller navigated moonlit paths, guided by primal instinct and a fierce will to survive. Though the night was cold, freedom burned bright in his chest, urging him on. If you're enjoying this story, share thoughts below. Stormcaller's fate has only just begun here. Morning arrived with an uneasy hush that settled over the forest. Baltus Harrington stood at the edge of the makeshift campsite, staring into the tangle of trees that had swallowed his prized stallion the night before. Though the fire had waned to gray embers, he still felt the heat of his own anger. The ritual was ruined and the horse was gone. Now he was trapped in this thick woodland, forced to continue a search he wished had ended swiftly. The men around him, exhausted from hours of stumbling through the dark, rubbed their eyes and gathered their courage. They knew better than to complain openly. Baltus tolerated no weakness. Yet each of them silently dreaded the hunt that lay ahead, sensing that Stormcaller was no ordinary horse. Corvin rose from a patch of flattened leaves where he had tossed and turned all night. His body felt stiff, and his conscience felt heavier still. Memories of Stormcaller's terrified whinny echoed in his mind. He recalled the force of the stallion's final surge of freedom, the powerful hooves striking the stone altar before vanishing into the forest gloom. Though he feared Baltus's wrath, a hidden part of him rejoiced that Stormcaller had escaped. As he gathered supplies, water canteens, rope, and a coil of feed, the stableman quietly thought of ways the horse might evade capture for good. Perhaps, he told himself, the wilderness would protect Stormcaller from the cruelty of men who saw him as nothing more than an asset to be bartered or sacrificed. At sunrise, Baltus barked orders. Half the men scattered to search the northern trails, while the rest fanned out south and west. They agreed to reassemble in a clearing by midday, exchanging any clues about Stormcaller's whereabouts. Baltus himself led the largest group, convinced that no stallion, no matter how swift, could travel far without leaving tracks. Corvin trailed behind, keeping his thoughts hidden. Despite the dense canopy, beams of sunlight sliced between the leaves, illuminating footprints and hoof imprints in the soft earth. A faint breeze carried the scent of wet moss. Occasionally, the men spotted broken twigs or a subtle trail of crushed vegetation. Every time they stumbled across such evidence, they quickened their pace, only to find that it stopped abruptly amid tangled brambles. Hours passed, and their frustration mounted. The forest, thick with ancient oaks and towering pines, seemed determined to swallow them whole. Baltus grew more irritable, snapping at those who failed to keep up. When midday approached and they had found no sign of Stormcaller, they regrouped in the designated clearing. The men who had gone north and west arrived nearly empty-handed, sharing only vague hints. A set of hoofprints half a mile upstream, a flash of black glimpsed between the trees. None of it led to the horse himself. Baltus spat on the ground, hands clenched into fists. Brother Zephram stood nearby, twisting his prayer beads anxiously. Though the clergyman insisted they must recover the stallion to complete the sacrifice and placate the harvest deity, Baltus's concerns ran deeper. This failure tarnished his pride. "The beast can't just vanish," Baltus snarled, voice taut with resentment. "Search every path, every stream. If we haven't found him by nightfall, we make camp again. But we do not leave until Stormcaller is in my hands. Understood?" The men nodded wearily, resigned to follow his orders. No one dared suggest abandoning the chase. After a brief rest, they spread out once more. The sun's heat pressed down, turning the forest interior humid and stifling. Mosquitoes buzzed in the underbrush, and the men batted them away with curses. Leaves rustled overhead as small creatures darted from tree to tree. For a moment, Corvin paused to listen. Birdsong drifted above them, a gentle contrast to Baltus's grumbling. He silently wondered if Stormcaller could sense the men's approach long before they ever spotted him. In a far corner of the forest, Stormcaller picked his way through a narrow ravine, hooves skittering on loose stones. A shallow stream trickled over smooth rocks, and he paused to lower his muzzle and drink. At last, the dryness in his throat subsided. His black coat glistened in the dappled sunlight as he stood, ears pricked for sounds of pursuit. No voices, no crackle of brush under heavy boots. Relieved but not complacent, he resumed his cautious progress. Beneath the cooling shade of tall ferns, Stormcaller found a small patch of grass. Though it was hardly the lush hay of Harrington Manor's stables, it provided enough nourishment to ease the growing ache in his belly. He grazed nervously, muscles tense to flee at any sudden noise. Despite his exhaustion, Stormcaller's spirit remained unbroken. He had spent most of his life hearing only the clink of bridles and the bark of commands. Now, with the wind rustling through leaves instead of whips, he felt an unfamiliar surge of possibility. The forest was no peaceful idyll. Wolves and cougars roamed in deeper thickets, and steep gullies could injure a horse that wandered carelessly. Yet for the first time, Stormcaller lived on his own terms. Even the memory of that cursed altar ignited a fierce determination to survive. He did not yet grasp the scope of Baltus's wrath, but his instincts told him never to return. As afternoon shadows stretched, Baltus stalked the forest floor with renewed impatience. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, trudged along, flanks lathered in sweat from the relentless pace. Brother Zephram accompanied him, muttering prayers and anxiously scanning the shadows. The priest's face revealed anxiety, not only for the lost stallion, but also for the consequences of failing to complete the ceremony. He whispered that the deity's displeasure might affect the region's crops, inviting drought or pestilence. Baltus, superstitious in his own pragmatic way, gritted his teeth at that possibility. Yet more than fear of any curse, he seethed with personal fury at having lost control. If he could not even manage his own horse, how would others perceive him? They pressed on. The searchers formed a wide line, hacking away vines and lowering themselves into gullies whenever they glimpsed what might be hoofprints. At one point, Baltus halted by a stagnant pond. Footmarks in the mud suggested a horse had drunk there. He dropped to a crouch and pressed his hand to the track. Still damp. Hope flickered in his chest. "Spread out," he ordered. "He can't be far." Eager for the chase, the men charged forward, hearts pounding. But the forest deceived them with twisting trails and misleading echoes. An hour passed, then another, with no further sign of Stormcaller. Morale dipped. The men whispered to each other, speculating that perhaps the stallion had circled back toward open fields while they toiled under the canopy. Corvin, though quiet, sensed that Stormcaller might linger close to water. Horses, especially one grown used to abundant stables, might crave fresh streams to drink from. Tuning out Baltus's heated orders, he split off from the group and followed the creek deeper into a maze of mossy stones. With each step, the noise of the search party faded. The gurgle of flowing water filled the air, along with the hush of overhead branches swaying in the late afternoon breeze. He moved carefully, scanning the banks for any trace of black hair or hoof scuff. At last, he found a few faint prints in the mud. Heart racing, he crept forward until he spotted a shadow within the brush. Stormcaller, quietly grazing. Corvin's breath caught at the sight. The stallion was thinly concealed by clusters of ferns. His sleek coat still shone, but dust and burrs clung to his tail. Keen ears perked as Corvin inched closer. A single twig snap would send him bolting again. Corvin crouched, raising an open palm in a gesture of calm. "Easy now," he whispered, voice trembling. He remembered the day he first brushed Stormcaller's coat, how the horse had snorted with pride. In the stable yard, Stormcaller never let novices approach without a challenge, but Corvin had always approached softly, winning the stallion's reluctant trust. Now, he wished he could speak the horse's language to say, "I'm sorry about everything. You deserve better than a blade on an altar." But no matter how gently his heart spoke, he knew his task might be to drag Stormcaller back. Stormcaller raised his head and fixed Corvin with a wary gaze. The stableman, kneeling in the mud, felt his throat tighten. Memories of Baltus's cruelty and the near sacrifice flickered. He recalled the brand on Stormcaller's flank, the symbol of Harrington's estate, and how the horse had been forced into contests and parades. He saw, too, the defiance in Stormcaller's eyes, a refusal to surrender. For a tense moment, neither moved. Then the snap of a branch from somewhere behind shattered the stillness. The stallion's ears flicked, and in a heartbeat, he turned and sprang away, hooves scattering pebbles as he vanished once again. A second later, Baltus burst from behind a gnarled tree, followed by two men brandishing ropes. "Where is he?" Baltus hissed, scanning the clearing. Corvin rose slowly, cursing under his breath. "He was here, but you startled him," he said, unable to hide his frustration. Baltus's face twisted in fury, and he aimed a vicious glare at Corvin. "You fool! We could have had him!" He stormed toward the ferns, shoving aside branches in a vain attempt to see any sign of Stormcaller. Nothing remained but disturbed vegetation and fresh hoofprints leading into denser growth. Baltus struck a low branch with the back of his hand in rage. Corvin braced himself, expecting a tirade. Instead, Baltus inhaled sharply, then spoke in a steely calm. "We have one chance left before the sun sets. We block him near the ravine. You two," he snarled at the men behind him, "circle around the south. If you see him, use the ropes immediately. No mistakes." They obeyed, though a palpable weariness hung about them. This chase was turning into an obsession for Baltus. Perhaps some felt pity for the stallion's plight. Others simply wanted to finish and return home. None risked voicing dissent, not after seeing the lethal determination in Baltus's eyes. Dusk approached, painting the sky in fiery hues. The air cooled, and long shadows cast eerie shapes among the oaks. Brother Zephram, who had trailed behind with his acolytes, lit fresh torches. The flickering flames illuminated snatches of twisted roots and low-hanging branches. Leaves whispered overhead, stirred by the same wind that seemed to carry Stormcaller ever beyond their reach. A hush fell on the searchers as they proceeded, hearts thumping. Each man knew that cornering a frightened stallion in near darkness could be dangerous, but no one dared question Baltus's command. So, pressed by exhaustion and driven by fear, they continued deeper into gloom. All the while, Stormcaller navigated the forest with silent determination, drawn by some primal force to remain free. In a small clearing, the stallion lifted his muzzle to the breeze, perhaps catching the scent of men and smoke. With a flick of his tail, he moved on, graceful as a specter at twilight. Tomorrow would dawn anew, and the chase would resume with fresh vigor. For now, Stormcaller took each moment of liberty like a drop of water for a parched soul, not knowing whether this fleeting taste of freedom could endure. Nightfall arrived with an unsettling hush, draping the forest in silvery shadows that swayed across the undergrowth. Baltus Harrington's men, exhausted from the day's futile pursuit, fanned out in a scattered line beneath flickering torchlight. The snap of twigs underfoot and the distant call of owls kept everyone on edge. Brother Zephram and his acolytes clutched their prayer beads, fear gnawing at their resolve. Baltus rode at the front, jaw clenched, scanning every pocket of darkness as though expecting Stormcaller to appear in a flash of black fury. Corvin lingered near the rear, shoulders aching from tension. The memory of the stallion's bold escape still pulsed in his mind. He half wished Stormcaller would slip away forever, yet dreaded Baltus's wrath should the chase prove fruitless another night. Darkness thickened ominously. With each flicker of the torches, the shadows writhed like silent spirits. Baltus signaled a halt, motioning for the men to listen. A faint rustling rose from a thicket of brambles, then fell quiet. Tension crackled among them, but when they crept forward, brandishing ropes and whispers, no horse emerged. The forest felt endless, full of hidden hollows and concealed glens where a clever stallion might vanish. Brother Zephram muttered about ill omens, imploring Baltus to redouble efforts lest they invite disaster. Rolling his shoulders in frustration, Baltus ordered the group to press on. His pride would not abide defeat at Stormcaller's hooves. The men trudged deeper, scanning every shifting shape for signs of glistening black fur. Night clung to them, heavy and unrelenting, blanketing any hope of easy victory. Corvin tried to ignore the creeping dread that tugged at his thoughts. He wondered whether Stormcaller sensed the torches, smelled the men, and slipped away just in time. Each snapped twig or rustled bush set his heart pounding, torn between relief at Stormcaller's freedom and fear of Baltus's reaction. Even the forest itself felt alive, shifting in the dark as if protecting the fugitive stallion. Sometimes a shape would flit at the edge of his vision, only to vanish when he pivoted. Perhaps it was a deer or a fox, but Corvin found himself imagining Stormcaller at every turn. His nerves rattled like loose coins in a tin, and each torchlit shadow seemed to mock him. A part of him prayed for dawn to arrive, revealing the truth or granting respite. At last, they stumbled onto a small clearing where ancient oaks towered overhead. Their broad trunks formed a protective circle, almost as though guarding a secret. Baltus halted abruptly. Low on the ground, a fresh hoofprint glimmered under torchlight, distinct and unmistakable. He signaled for silence, breathing hard. Corvin crouched, fingertips brushing the print's outline. It was deep, suggesting Stormcaller had stood still here, perhaps listening or resting. A hint of excitement flickered through the group. Finally, something tangible. Brother Zephram offered a shaky prayer, but Baltus pressed on, following faint tracks around the trunk of the largest oak. Another hoofprint pointed north. Heartbeats quickened, and men readied their ropes. Corvin's stomach knotted, torn between hope for Stormcaller's deliverance and dread for what Baltus might do next. The chase intensified. Just beyond the clearing, the woods grew dense again, branches weaving into a canopy that trapped the torch smoke overhead. The men struggled to keep sight of one another, calling out softly to avoid becoming scattered. In that darkness, every sense sharpened. A twig snapped to their left, and Corvin spun around, heart leaping. But it was only a startled hare bounding away. Baltus cursed under his breath, pressing forward with grim determination. His eyes swept the murky paths, imagining Stormcaller's glossy flank just beyond reach. Zephram clutched his robes, frightened of whatever retribution might follow if the ceremony remained incomplete. Corvin repressed a shiver, silently beseeching the forest to shield the horse from this relentless onslaught. Sweat trickled down his temples despite the night air, and each footstep echoed. Their progress soon brought them to a steep slope littered with loose stones. One of the men nearly lost his footing, sending pebbles clattering into the darkness. Baltus dismounted, preferring to lead his horse by the reins rather than risk a fall. Clouds concealed the moon, casting everything in deeper gloom. Brother Zephram whispered that they ought to pause and pray, but Baltus refused, muttering about wasted time. Corvin tested each step, mindful of how easily a misstep could shatter a leg. Sweat drenched his shirt despite the cool air. Gripping a torch, he peered ahead, searching the shadows for movement. He imagined Stormcaller climbing these slopes, guided by moonlight and instinct. Determination burned in his chest, though he wasn't sure whose side he stood on. Night pressed around them. At the summit, they found no sign of Stormcaller's passage. Only the eerie hush of treetops greeted them, swirling in a gentle breeze. Baltus ordered a quick scout of the ridge, but nothing emerged beyond moonlit silence. The men, hollow-eyed and shivering, began to grumble. They had trudged these woods for hours without rest, sustained only by fear of Baltus's wrath. Brother Zephram insisted the ritual must be completed soon, else the harvest might fail. Baltus glared at him, retorting that the sacrifice meant nothing if the horse remained lost. Corvin studied the sky, longing for dawn's light to offer clarity. Yet the night dragged on with tension. Their shared desperation clung like fog, twisting each breath into a burden. Stormcaller lingered somewhere within this labyrinth, just out of reach. Eventually, Baltus relented to exhaustion, declaring they would camp on the ridge and resume at first light. Under his curt orders, men gathered fallen branches for a modest fire. A trembling flame soon cast dancing shapes against the trees. Corvin lowered himself onto a flat rock, arms quivering from weariness. He gazed at the darkness beyond the flickering glow, imagining Stormcaller's eyes shining with defiance somewhere below. Despite his fatigue, he could not banish the memory of how close he had come to reaching the horse earlier. A chance squandered, or a blessing in disguise? The question lingered like the smoke curling overhead. Brother Zephram knelt in prayer, while Baltus stared at the embers, seething. None dared speak, and silence weighed upon them like a stern judge. Sleep seemed far. Huddled around the wavering fire, most men dozed in uneasy bouts, twitching at every soft rustle. Corvin sat with his back against a mossy trunk, eyelids heavy yet mind adrift. He replayed the image of Stormcaller bursting free from the altar, hooves striking stone, eyes blazing with terror and resolve. Even now, the memory stirred a surge of admiration deep within him. That horse deserved life, not some grim ritual for the sake of hollow prestige. Darkness pressed in again, and Corvin felt his limbs slump. He tried to remain awake, bracing himself for another call to action, yet his exhaustion was profound. Eventually, he drifted into a fitful doze, mind haunted by flickering visions of galloping shadows. Somewhere beyond their frail circle of light, Stormcaller roamed, unbroken and alone. When dawn finally stole over the horizon, its pale glow revealed drawn faces and stiff limbs. The men blinked at the gray sky, struggling to stand and shake off the cold. Baltus, still consumed by bitterness, snapped at them to ready for another search. Brother Zephram sighed, urging them to remember their purpose, reclaim the horse and satisfy their sacred duty. Corvin stretched aching muscles, shoulders knotted from leaning against the trunk. Gazing across the ridge, he glimpsed blue mountains in the distance, silent witnesses to the prior day's turmoil. Stormcaller was somewhere amid that vast expanse of trees, breathing in freedom. Perhaps, Corvin mused, the stallion would never be caught. This thought sparked both dread and hope in his heart. Rubbing his eyes, he followed Baltus's command, bracing himself. As the new day blossomed, the ridge awoke to a pale sunrise, and a cautious stillness settled among Baltus Harrington's men. They had slept poorly on the hard ground, jolting awake at every whisper of wind. Now they stood in clusters, stamping their feet to chase away the lingering chill. Despite his own stiff joints, Baltus wasted no time cracking orders, intent on resuming the hunt for Stormcaller. One group would descend into the ravine, another would trace the winding creek, and Baltus himself would comb the deeper thickets toward the west. Brother Zephram hovered at his side, muttering apprehensions that the deity's patience might be waning. Baltus silenced him with a curt wave, eyes ablaze with an unspoken vow. This day would not end in failure. Corvin, still shaken from the previous night's turmoil, tightened the straps of a small pack filled with ropes and dried rations. A restless energy coursed through him, equal parts worry and curiosity. He replayed the memory of Stormcaller's near capture, the fleeting moment when he had locked eyes with the stallion by the creek. If he had only remained silent, had only beckoned in gentleness, perhaps Stormcaller would not have bolted. Yet he knew that was a foolish hope. Stormcaller's spirit was far too fierce for easy surrender. Soon the search parties departed, each group moving with measured haste into the labyrinth of trees. Sunbeams slanted through the canopy, catching droplets of dew on fern fronds and bathing the forest floor in soft gold. Corvin's boots crunched over scattered pine needles as he followed his assigned route, accompanied by two other men known simply as Baker and Reeves. They had a quiet demeanor, seldom speaking unless Baltus demanded it. Today, however, a certain tension bound them together, so they spoke in hushed tones. "This is madness," Baker muttered once Baltus was out of earshot. "All this for a horse that doesn't want to be found." Reeves, shoulders hunched, nodded grimly. "Baltus won't quit, though. Not after that fiasco with the sacrifice. He'd rather starve out here than return empty-handed." Corvin said nothing. He simply kept his gaze forward, scanning for signs of hoofprints in the fresh morning light. Inwardly, he shared their sentiment. The entire affair felt grotesque, pursuing a living being that had almost been slaughtered to appease superstition. He whispered a silent wish that if they did find Stormcaller, perhaps the horse would outrun them once more. But loyalty and fear of Baltus chained his feet to the path. They trudged on for over an hour, weaving around thick trunks and stepping carefully across stones slick with moss. A small waterfall gurgled nearby, pouring into a shallow basin where water glinted under slivers of sunlight. Corvin paused to investigate the soft bank for tracks. In one patch of mud he found the imprint of a single hoof, pointed westward. Baker and Reeves exchanged uneasy looks. "Fresh?" Reeves asked. Corvin pressed a finger to the indentation. The mud still felt damp, pliable. "Not older than an hour or two," he whispered. He scanned the undergrowth, tension rippling through his limbs. Stormcaller was close, or had been. Baker frowned, glancing over his shoulder. "Baltus will want to know." A sour taste rose in Corvin's throat. He knew reporting any clue meant reinforcing the chase. Yet he could not deny Baltus's authority. "We'll mark the location," he said, voice subdued. He carved a quick cross on a nearby trunk and scribbled a note indicating the direction of the track. Leaving the waterfall behind, they followed the hoof trail along a faint animal path. Thick vines and low-hanging branches forced them to duck or cut their way through, slowing progress. Sunlight flickered overhead, sometimes revealing glimpses of a higher slope in the distance. An hour passed, then two. They found more prints, some deep, some barely visible, leading them ever onward. Corvin's heart thumped in conflicted rhythm. With each sign of Stormcaller, they drew nearer to capturing him, but he could not deny a twist of guilt coiling in his gut. Eventually, the path opened into a small glade dotted with wildflowers and ringed by maple trees. Their leaves glimmered in the midday radiance, casting shifting mosaics of light on the grass. Corvin froze mid-step. The air carried a faint sound, the gentle snort of a horse. Motioning for Baker and Reeves to remain silent, he inched forward, crouching behind a clump of tall grass. His pulse quickened at the sight before him. Stormcaller stood in the clearing, muzzle near the ground, nibbling tufts of bright greenery. His black coat glistened, marred only by patches of dirt. Without a saddle or bridle, he seemed a creature of the wild, each muscle shaped by liberation rather than captivity. Corvin noted how the stallion's ears twitched, scanning for dangers. The horse's flanks still rose and fell quickly, a sign that he had run hard not long before. Stormcaller's stance revealed caution, but also a newfound confidence, as though he belonged here. From behind him, Baker and Reeves slowly emerged, gripping ropes. Corvin raised a hand to signal caution. "He'll bolt if we rush," he breathed. "We need to be careful." Baker snorted. "If Baltus were here, he'd tell us to charge in." Corvin shook his head. "He's not, and we have a chance to do this quietly. Just follow my lead." He set his rope aside, heart pounding. Years as a stableman had taught him the importance of calm energy when approaching a skittish horse. Stormcaller might remember him, might sense something familiar in his scent or posture. Taking slow, measured steps, Corvin advanced, hands open at his sides. Baker and Reeves watched anxiously, ropes coiled in their fists. The stallion raised his head, ears pricking forward. Corvin paused, letting Stormcaller see him clearly. "Easy, boy," Corvin whispered, keeping his voice low. "No one's here to hurt you." Stormcaller's nostrils flared. He shifted his weight, eyes fixed on Corvin. Behind Corvin, Baker and Reeves inched forward. Twigs snapped underfoot, and Stormcaller stomped in alarm. Corvin froze, then gently lifted a hand. "Stay back," he hissed to the others. They complied, though impatience radiated from them. Stormcaller exhaled sharply, as if weighing the risk of flight. Corvin remembered how close he had come the day before, how the horse had dashed off at the slightest crack. If Stormcaller turned to flee now, there would be no second chance in such an enclosed area. Corvin inhaled slowly, letting Stormcaller watch every movement, aiming to show no threat. Time stretched. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Corvin took one step closer. Stormcaller tossed his head but did not bolt. Another step. Corvin could see the stallion's muscles tense, poised to leap if anything felt wrong. The stableman's heart hammered, but he kept his voice soft. "It's all right," he murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." Stormcaller pawed the ground, unsure. Then, as though memory stirred, he lowered his head slightly. Corvin reached out, palm facing up. For a brief instant, Stormcaller leaned in, nostrils quivering as he picked up Corvin's scent. Hope and dread spiraled in Corvin's chest. If Stormcaller recognized him as a caretaker from the estate, perhaps he would allow contact. Yet in the same heartbeat, Corvin realized that capturing the horse now would seal Stormcaller's fate. Baltus's cruelty would only intensify after such a grand pursuit. A hush pressed down around them. Baker and Reeves stood tensely, ropes at the ready. Corvin thought of simply stepping away, letting Stormcaller vanish once more. But he knew they would never give up. If not today, then tomorrow. The chase would continue until the stallion was found or forced into a corner. A wave of helplessness swept through him. He patted his pockets and realized he had a small chunk of dried apple left over from breakfast. Slowly, he withdrew the morsel, extending it. Stormcaller's eyes flickered with cautious interest. Corvin waited, barely breathing. At length, the stallion took a trembling step forward. His muzzle brushed Corvin's outstretched hand, warm breath tickling Corvin's palm. Corvin dared not move, letting Stormcaller nibble at the apple. Heart hammering, he stifled the urge to speak. Baker and Reeves watched with amazement, seeing the horse approach Corvin rather than bolt. Then, abrupt as a thunderclap, a distant shout rang out. Baltus's voice. In that frozen instant, Stormcaller jerked his head up, ears pinned back. The spell shattered. Baker lunged forward with a rope, spooked by the shout, hoping to seize the moment. But Stormcaller whipped around, hooves kicking up earth. Corvin shouted a warning, but it was too late. Baker's rope flew wide, missing Stormcaller's flank. The stallion surged into motion, bounding across the clearing and disappearing through a gap between maple trees. "Damn it, Baker!" Reeves snarled, stumbling over the grass. "He was right there," Baker cursed, panting. "I heard Baltus, thought the horse would run anyway." Corvin sank to his knees, heart heavy. It seemed fate had intervened to preserve Stormcaller's freedom, yet he could not ignore the dread creeping over him. If Baltus arrived now and learned they had lost the stallion again, there would be fury to face. Sure enough, shouts and crashing footfalls announced Baltus's approach. The orchard-like glade filled with the thunder of men surging forth, brandishing ropes. Baltus's rage blazed in his eyes when he saw only the swirl of dust and disturbed grass. "You had him?" Baltus spat, dismounting. "Where did he go?" Corvin rose slowly. "He fled west," he answered, voice subdued. Brother Zephram, right behind Baltus, crossed himself. "The stallion is doomed to roam forever if we continue this way," he muttered. Baltus ignored him, rounding on Corvin with savage intensity. "Explain. You're good with horses. How did he get away again?" Corvin swallowed. He was calm for a moment. "Then your shout scared him. Baker tried to rope him. He bolted." Baltus's nostrils flared. "I told you to stay alert. We've wasted half the day." His glare swept Baker and Reeves, who cowered before him. Then his rage refocused on Corvin. "Don't you dare fail me again. I'll do whatever it takes to see that horse grovel." In the stunned silence, a faint breeze stirred the flowers. Baltus exhaled, stepping toward the tracks Stormcaller left in the grass. He pressed a boot into the imprint, scowling. "We continue west. The forest thins there. If he tries to run for open fields, we can corner him." The men nodded, though dread lingered. Exhaustion weighed on them, but Baltus's will seemed unstoppable. Even Brother Zephram, pale as a sheet, looked resigned. Corvin glanced at the spot where Stormcaller had stood. He felt a pang of regret for having extended the apple slice, for almost coaxing the horse into captivity. And yet a secret spark of relief flickered that Stormcaller had escaped once more. Mounting their horses, they set off in a furious march, forging west through tangles of bracken and gnarled shrubs. Thorny vines scratched their arms, and hidden roots snagged at hooves. Now and then, they found Stormcaller's fresh prints, but each time they followed, the tracks vanished among stones or thick brush. Step by step, hour by hour, they pressed on. The sun crept overhead, scorching them, and thirst took hold. Baltus ignored the men's complaints, refusing to pause. The single-minded drive to capture Stormcaller propelled him onward like an unrelenting tide. Late in the afternoon, the forest canopy began to thin as promised. The trees grew more spaced, allowing glimpses of rolling fields beyond. Corvin inhaled the fresh breeze, relief and apprehension mingling in his lungs. Beyond the final band of woodland, farmland stretched in gentle swells. If Stormcaller ventured there, Baltus's men could encircle him easily. The stallion would have nowhere left to hide. Corvin's mouth felt dry. He dreaded the idea of Stormcaller galloping helplessly across open ground, roped and dragged back to Harrington Manor. Yet there was no turning back. Baltus halted the party at the forest's edge, scanning the fields below with hawk-like vigilance. Tidy patches of farmland dotted the horizon, and a narrow dirt road curved along a line of brush. Smoke rose from a distant cottage, hinting at habitation. Brother Zephram murmured a shaky prayer, as if anticipating that the next hours would decide Stormcaller's fate. Corvin observed the fields in uneasy silence. If the stallion had come this way, they would see him soon enough. And if not, they might trace the perimeter, questioning farmers and travelers. Sooner or later, Stormcaller would be found. Baltus gestured for the group to split again, half to skirt the northern boundary, half to circle south. Corvin, Baker, and Reeves accompanied Baltus. The humidity pressed on them, and the scent of freshly turned earth drifted on the breeze. As they emerged from the tree line, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. Evening shadows stretched across the fields, lending them a deceptive calm. In the distance, Corvin saw a lone figure guiding a mule-drawn cart along the dusty road, but no sign of a black stallion. Baltus scowled. They forged on, hooves stirring puffs of dust. The farmland grew quiet, only the rustle of grain stalks whispering in the gentle wind. Yet Stormcaller was there, somewhere, breathing that same twilight air. Corvin imagined the horse peering at them from behind a hedgerow or crouching beyond a hill's crest. Each moment carried the tension of possibility. With the open terrain, Stormcaller might have no place to hide, unless fate again offered protection. They rode on into the deepening sunset, searching for any glimpse of that dark mane. Although the day neared its close, Baltus radiated unwavering determination. If Stormcaller was within sight, they would chase him to the ends of the horizon. Corvin's heart pounded as the sky bled color, ominous and wondrous. For the stallion, an uncertain destiny beckoned. For Baltus and his men, the final confrontation loomed just beyond the paling light. Baltus Harrington spurred his mount onward, ignoring the gathering dusk that stretched across the farmland like a worn blanket. With Brother Zephram and a handful of exhausted riders at his flank, he pressed toward a narrow lane that led into rolling fields of barley. The golden stalks shimmered under the dying light, and Corvin, trailing behind, felt his pulse hammer at the thought of Stormcaller sprinting through that ocean of grain. The horse could be anywhere now, invisible amid the rustling plants. Each time a breeze rippled across the stalks, they bent in gentle waves, and Corvin could almost see the outline of a dark silhouette weaving among them. Hope and dread warred within him, for if Stormcaller had indeed ventured here, the stallion might soon face the cornering that Baltus anticipated. Yet a tiny part of Corvin wondered if, even on open ground, Stormcaller's swiftness could elude them once again. As if reading his thoughts, Baltus barked at the men to spread out and comb the edges of the fields, determined to leave no path unsearched before darkness fully swallowed the land. Baker and Reeves flanked Corvin on either side, their expressions a mix of fatigue and a dogged desire to be done with this chase. In the distance, the silhouette of a cottage loomed, lamp-lit windows glowing like tiny beacons in the oncoming night. Occasionally, a dog's bark echoed from some hidden yard, lending the farmland an eerie undercurrent of watchfulness. They advanced in a line, heads pivoting left and right, scanning for the faintest shift in the barley that could signal Stormcaller's presence. Brother Zephram uttered hushed invocations, as though seeking divine guidance through the gloom. Meanwhile, Baltus remained as tense as a bowstring, his nostrils flaring every time the wind carried a rustle. Corvin recognized in him not just anger, but something deeper, a desperation born of wounded pride. Stormcaller's rebellious flight had exposed a crack in Baltus's invincible facade. If he returned home empty-handed, the sting of that humiliation would burn for months to come, and so, with night pressing on all sides, they marched, certain that the stallion must be near. Corvin's group angled north, skirting the edge of the barley fields where a cluster of elm trees cast long, wavering shadows. As they prowled through the dimness, a subtle tremor in the stalks suddenly froze them. Baker gestured for silence, pointing at a swath of grain that shook in short pulses. Corvin's heart soared and sank simultaneously. Could it be Stormcaller, crouched low and hoping to remain hidden? The next instant the barley parted, and a pair of startled pheasants burst forth, flapping frantically into the twilight sky. With disappointed groans, the men resumed their creeping search deeper into the field. With every step, the dryness of stalks scraped against their boots, rustling a constant warning that intruders were near. If Stormcaller was nearby, Corvin prayed the horse might slip away once more, for the open farmland gave little cover. Yet each time he tried to calm his conscience, an image of Baltus's fury rose in his mind. If they spent another night in vain, the repercussions would be severe. Guilt gnawed at Corvin's chest. The fields gradually widened into a broad plain, with row after row of barley swaying in the faint breeze. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving only a dusky glow that made each figure appear like a ghost in the gloom. Overhead, the first stars blinked awake. From somewhere deeper in the farmland, Baltus's distant voice carried through the hush, urging his men forward. Corvin could imagine him perched on his horse, scanning the horizon with vengeful intent. Baker muttered about the futility of chasing a creature more at home in open land than any of them. Reeves wiped sweat from his brow, muttering that they might as well light torches again. Corvin knew torches would be necessary soon, but dreaded how the flickering firelight might spook Stormcaller into a desperate dash. They pressed on, stepping carefully, ears straining for the faintest snort or hoofbeat. In that wide swath of farmland, every shadow seemed suspicious, but none resolved into the shape they most feared or hoped to see. Night pressed in, and the chase felt endless. At last, Baker produced a flint and sparked a small torch, the orange glow flickering against his sweat-stained face. Reeves followed suit, and soon they had a trio of flames bobbing in the darkness. With their circle of light came both comfort and risk. The farmland no longer looked boundless and menacing, but their presence became plain to any watchful eye. Corvin advanced cautiously, one hand shielding the torch to prevent sparks from drifting onto the dry stalks. He kept imagining Stormcaller's startled eyes catching the flicker and deciding to flee. It was the same conflict he had battled for days. He wanted to protect the stallion, yet was compelled to assist in his capture. Duty warred with empathy in every breath. As they ventured farther, a gentle slope rose ahead, cresting into a silhouette beneath the starlit sky. From behind that ridge, a faint whinny drifted. Corvin froze, heart thudding. That single note carried the distinct timbre of Stormcaller's voice. Baker and Reeves exchanged quick, electrified glances. This time, Corvin feared, there would be no easy escape for the horse he had come to admire. Steeling himself, Corvin led the way up the slope, pausing every few steps to keep his torch low. The whinny had gone silent, but the air felt charged with the horse's nearness. With each crunch of barley stubble beneath their boots, Corvin expected Stormcaller to emerge or flee. Behind them, Baker's breath rasped in nervous anticipation. Reeves clenched his rope, knuckles white. When they reached the crest, an open pasture spread out below, separated from the barley by a low wooden fence. In the faint torchlight, Corvin spotted a lone silhouette standing near that fence line. The shape was unmistakable, Stormcaller, head held high, mane rippling in the night breeze. He seemed to watch them, motionless except for a twitch of his tail. Corvin's heart clenched. The horse could have fled into the open darkness, yet here he stood, as if waiting. Perhaps weariness from days of running had tempered his instinct. Perhaps he sensed that the farmland held few hiding places, or maybe some deeper bond drew him toward the stableman whose gentle voice he recognized. Corvin swallowed, uncertain which possibility weighed more heavily on his conscience. Behind them, the glow of additional torches appeared, bobbing as more riders arrived. Corvin heard Baltus's sharp commands cut through the hush, and he knew the final showdown had come. If Stormcaller tried to escape now, he would have to dodge a growing ring of men. The stallion stamped a hoof and tossed his head, seeming to measure the distance between himself and the oncoming threat. Corvin stepped forward, voice quavering. "Stormcaller," he called as gently as he could. The horse's ears flicked, and for a moment Corvin believed the stallion might recall all those quiet mornings when Corvin had brushed his coat. But the moment shattered when Baltus barreled up the slope, eyes fixed on the dark outline by the fence. He raised a hand, signaling the men to surround the pasture. Stormcaller snorted, backing away. A tension like lightning crackled across the scene. Corvin felt a flash of guilt so intense it stole his breath. The horse had run so far, fought so hard, and all for what? The sense of impending capture pressed on them like a heavy storm cloud. Baltus bellowed, "No mistakes." The men fanned out with ropes coiled, cutting off every exit. Stormcaller reared, hooves pawing at the starry sky. In that electrified moment, the world held its breath. Anticipation hung thick. Stormcaller's hooves churned the earth as he came back down from his panicked rear, chest heaving with alarm. The men who circled the pasture advanced with ropes poised, led by Baltus's bristling fury. The night air pulsed with tension. Flickers from the torches cast Stormcaller's ebony flank in shimmering gold, turning the farmland into a stage for impending conflict. Corvin, standing near the crest of the slope, felt a chill that went beyond the physical. He saw fear in the horse's eyes, but he also saw pride. For a moment he recalled the creature's gentler days in Harrington's stable yard, the stallion's regal bearing, and the subtle trust once forged between them. Now all that was overshadowed by the chase and the looming threat of forced submission. "Spread out!" Baltus roared, voice echoing across the field. Several men rushed forward, forming a semicircle intended to corral the stallion against the old wooden fence. Stormcaller tossed his head, muscles rippling as though deciding whether to charge straight through them or leap for a gap that might open at the final moment. A single miscalculation and the men would close in. Brother Zephram hung back, beads clutched to his chest, expression torn between duty and a flicker of pity. He had come to ensure the sacrifice was carried out, but the sight of the terrified animal gnawed at his conscience. Still, he offered no plea for mercy. Corvin suspected that even Zephram knew reason would never pierce Baltus's single-minded resolve. Stormcaller stomped, snorting in agitation as the men advanced. Dust rose from the parched ground, swirling around their ankles. Corvin longed to tell them all to stop, to let the horse slip into the night and find peace. Instead, he found himself edging closer, compelled by the unstoppable momentum of events. If Stormcaller charged, someone might be trampled, or the horse might snap a leg on rough ground. The danger weighed heavily on Corvin's mind. In one swift motion, a stable hand tried to loop a rope around Stormcaller's neck. The stallion evaded, jerking sideways with surprising agility. Another rope flew from the left, grazing his flank without catching. Stormcaller whirled, tail lashing, but the ring of men tightened. Baltus shouted commands, eyes gleaming with destructive triumph. It was as though each missed lasso stoked his fury, feeding his desire to subdue this proud creature. Corvin noticed a fleeting opening near the fence, a narrow space between two men. Stormcaller might have seen it too, for his ears flicked that way. For one agonizing heartbeat, Corvin silently urged him to run, to slip past the men before they could react. Stormcaller lowered his head, poised to lunge. Then a rope sailed through the darkness, landing solidly across his withers and catching. A grunt of alarm tore from the horse's throat. The rope snagged and Stormcaller reared again, yanking the line taut. The man holding the other end nearly lost his grip, skidding across loose gravel. Another pair of stable hands rushed in, tossing their own ropes in a desperate attempt to secure Stormcaller's hindquarters. With a sudden pivot, the stallion kicked out, hooves slicing the air. One rope slapped around his left foreleg instead, tangling there. Fear and fury coursed through the horse as he struggled to stay upright. Baltus advanced like a hunter, closing on wounded prey. "Hold him," he snarled, seizing a rope that dragged through the dirt. With every muscle straining, Stormcaller fought back, tossing his head and thrashing. Each breath hammered in Corvin's chest as he watched the horse's eyes roll with terror. This was no graceful riding lesson, no refined display of horsemanship. It was raw confrontation, untempered by kindness. Brother Zephram found his voice, calling out, "He'll hurt himself like this." He threw a desperate glance at Baltus, who seemed not to care. A subtle tension thickened. The possibility that Stormcaller might be seriously injured loomed over them, and Corvin felt sick to his stomach. Others watched, uncertain whether to assist or stand aside. Ropes tightened, pinning Stormcaller's movements. The stallion let out a high-pitched squeal, rearing again. This time, one back hoof came down on the fence rail, splintering the wood with a sharp crack. Baltus cursed, hauling on the line until his arms bulged. Stormcaller stumbled, nearly collapsing under the weight of multiple ropes tugging in different directions. Then, with a final burst of defiance, he twisted free of two lines, leaving them limp in the dirt. For an instant, Corvin thought Stormcaller might escape once more, but with the left foreleg still snared, the horse could not sprint. Each thrash only tightened the loop. Baltus lunged, seizing that rope and pulling with all his might. Stormcaller bucked, hooves pounding the ground in angry protest. The men formed a flank around him, brandishing more ropes, determined not to lose the advantage again. Sparks flared from a dropped torch and a faint flame caught on the tall grass near the fence. Gasps rose from the watchers as a thin ribbon of fire began to creep, lapping hungrily at the brittle stalks. Corvin darted forward, stamping at the flame with his foot until it sputtered out. Amid the chaos, Stormcaller's eyes flashed wide, nostrils flaring at the acrid scent of smoke. The men capitalized on his momentary distraction, wrestling more ropes around his powerful neck. Baltus barked at them to tighten. Stormcaller shook his head violently, sending spittle through the air. Corvin, hard in his throat, saw how the cords bit into the horse's flesh, leaving angry welts. Every muscle in Stormcaller's body strained against captivity. Then, with a labored grunt, he slumped to his knees, half trapped by the suffocating cords. A ragged hush fell over the field. Stormcaller crouched in the dirt, flanks heaving like a bellows. The men glanced at each other, uncertain if the horse would rise again or if his spirit had finally broken. Baltus, triumphant, stepped nearer, sweat glistening on his brow. "At last," he breathed. "Now, we return him to my estate, where he belongs." Corvin crouched by Stormcaller's side, eyes darting to the rope looped around the left foreleg. The horse's breathing rasped, and veins pulsed across his neck. Gently, Corvin tried to ease the pressure of the snare, but Baltus snapped, "Don't coddle him. Tie him securely. We leave at once." The stableman's stomach twisted. He wished to protest, to let the stallion stand without further harm. Yet he feared Baltus more. Silently, Corvin did what he could to avoid causing undue pain. They spent precious minutes reorganizing themselves, ensuring the ropes were well secured to prevent another bolt. Stormcaller quivered, still defiant but weakened by the struggle. Brother Zephram watched from a short distance, lips pursed in an uneasy line. At length he approached. "We must proceed," he said quietly to Baltus. "The sacrifice should not be delayed longer." Baltus turned, furious. "I'll decide when and how the ceremony continues. The horse needs rest, or he'll be worthless in the ritual." His voice rang with cold logic. He jabbed a finger at Corvin. "You? See that he can walk. We're heading back tonight. We'll stable him at Harrington Manor and finish this business soon." Corvin's heart lurched. Another day might buy Stormcaller a slim chance. Even so, the stallion's immediate fate appeared grim. Corralling that royal of emotion, Corvin nodded. With trembling hands, he carefully helped Stormcaller rise. The horse's left foreleg wobbled, bearing the marks of the rope. Stormcaller pinned his ears, uneasy. Corvin murmured a soothing apology under his breath. He had never felt so powerless. Under Baltus's harsh supervision, the group fashioned a makeshift halter from the ropes. Stormcaller's flanks glistened with sweat, and his breathing remained ragged. Yet he managed to stand, albeit trembling. The circle of men parted to give him space. Leading him required both caution and force. Each step risked a sudden outburst, but the stallion seemed too spent to repeat his earlier defiance. Once they were satisfied Stormcaller would not collapse, Baltus ordered them to move. The men, bruised and weary, guided the horse along the dim path back toward the distant line of trees. Brother Zephram trudged behind, silent. It would be a long journey in the dark, navigating farmland and forest with a captive stallion. Corvin bit his lip, wondering if Stormcaller's injuries would flare with every jolt and stumble. After half an hour, they passed the slope and re-entered the barley fields, this time with their prize in tow. The moon had risen high, painting the farmland in pale silver. Stormcaller staggered once, nearly falling, but a chorus of shouted commands pushed him forward. Corvin walked close to the stallion's head, stroking his damp neck when he could. He spoke in low tones about calmer days, about brushing and feeding him sweet apples. Though Stormcaller did not answer, his ears flicked at the sound of that gentle voice. At the farmland's edge, the men paused to rest. The tension in the group was palpable, both relief that they had succeeded and dread of the final act. Baltus eyed Stormcaller with a strange expression, half contempt and half twisted admiration. He had wanted to break the horse's spirit, but some part of him begrudged the stallion's magnificence. Brother Zephram coughed politely, reminding Baltus of the vow they had made. Their next stop, Harrington Manor, would host a sacrifice that might cement Baltus's reputation or bring about scandal if it failed. Corvin could barely stomach the thought. He prayed that Stormcaller would recover enough strength to resist. But the horse stood with head bowed, ropes binding him from muzzle to haunches. The stableman's heart felt raw. Leading Stormcaller back to the place that had once been his luxurious prison felt like a betrayal. He tried not to remember Stormcaller's earlier grace, that proud gallop across open fields. The stallion had tasted freedom for a time, only to end here, battered and bound. Baltus signaled the march to resume. Under the cold starlight, they crossed into the forest path. Stormcaller, battered but unbroken, hobbled forward, each hoofstep a dull thud of resignation. Corvin followed, lost in fearful imaginings of what awaited them all at Harrington Manor. If a second miracle did not intervene, Stormcaller's final day might soon dawn. And deep in Corvin's chest, a fragile resolve began to form, a vow that if any chance to save the horse arose, he would find the courage to act. The wind sighed through the trees, and the darkness seemed to close around them, cloaking both hope and despair as the journey continued. By the time Baltus Harrington's party emerged from the forest with Stormcaller in tow, the night had grown painfully cold. The men's breath formed pale clouds, and each creak of the roped halter grated on Corvin's nerves. Stormcaller walked gingerly, his left foreleg still bearing the raw marks of the rope that had snared him. Every so often the stallion jerked his head or snorted, but he was too exhausted to mount another struggle. Baltus led them forward with tireless resolve, barking at anyone who dared slow the pace. Even Baker and Reeves, normally stoic, appeared shaken by what they had witnessed. The ground underfoot felt endless, a winding route through black silhouettes of trees and shifting shadows. Corvin's heart ached with guilt, pulsing like a bruise that refused to fade. He could not erase the memory of Stormcaller's desperate eyes or the ominous words of Brother Zephram about the upcoming sacrifice. They reached Harrington Manor close to dawn, accompanied by a dull gray sky streaked with pink. From a distance, the manor loomed with its ornate pillars and immaculate grounds, but now it seemed almost sinister. Torches still burned at the gate, revealing weary guards who rubbed their eyes at the sight of Baltus returning victorious. The heavy iron gates swung wide, and the caravan filed into the courtyard. Stable hands emerged, yawning and curious, only to freeze when they spotted Stormcaller's condition. Word spread quickly that the prize stallion was back, battered, but still alive. Baltus dismounted and shouted for a veterinarian at once. Though he intended to sacrifice Stormcaller, he saw no advantage in letting the horse die beforehand. Muttering quietly, Corvin helped guide Stormcaller into a large stall, heart pounding with every unsteady step the horse took. The stable was spacious, yet oppressively silent. Usually the air rang with the gentle nickers of well-cared-for horses, but this morning, tension reigned. Stormcaller took in his surroundings with flickering eyes, as though recognizing the polished floors and gleaming tack that once symbolized his captivity. Corvin used a damp cloth to wipe the stallion's coat, whispering soft reassurances. Strands of hay clung to the horse's tangled mane, and dried sweat left dark streaks across his flanks. Brother Zephram hovered in the doorway, wearing a conflicted expression. He offered no comfort to the horse, focusing instead on the ceremonial obligations. After conferring briefly with Baltus, the priest declared that the sacrifice would take place by the next sundown. They would allow Stormcaller minimal rest and ensure no further chance to escape. Through the morning hours, Corvin and the stable hands tended to Stormcaller's wounds. The rope burns along his foreleg were treated with a cooling salve, while an herbal mixture eased the rawness around his neck. Baker and Reeves, though exhausted, assisted quietly, exchanging few words. Their eyes spoke volumes, a weary regret, a realization that their role in subduing the stallion might haunt them. Each time Stormcaller flinched from their touch, a pang of guilt twisted in Corvin's gut. He knew the horse would never again trust them. Outside, Baltus paced in the courtyard, refusing to rest until every detail of the sacrifice was arranged. Brother Zephram joined him, and the two spoke in hushed tones about altars, offerings, and an audience of local landowners expected to attend. Corvin's stomach churned at the thought of onlookers admiring Stormcaller's final moments. As midday approached, a sense of grim anticipation spread across the manor. Servants whispered about the horse's plight, and the hush of dread weighed on every conversation. Even those who seldom questioned Baltus's decisions felt uneasy. Corvin noticed how each stable hand who entered Stormcaller's stall would pause, hand trembling against the latch, as though fearing the repercussions of what was to come. Yet no one dared speak out loud against Baltus. The man's name carried too much power, and his temper was notorious. Meanwhile, Stormcaller stood listlessly, refusing most of the feed Corvin offered. Occasionally he drank a mouthful of water, but the bold spark in his gaze had dimmed. Corvin guessed that pain and betrayal consumed the stallion's spirit, leaving little energy for defiance. Late in the afternoon, Baltus made his rounds, inspecting every detail of the preparations. A temporary altar had been erected in one of the estate's courtyards, shielded from public view by tall hedges. Carved symbols and polished brass vessels gleamed in the waning sunlight, waiting for the horse's arrival. Brother Zephram oversaw the arrangement of ritual tools, an ornate dagger, a chalice for collecting sacrificial blood, and a brazier for burning incense. Beyond the hedges, a small gathering of landowners had begun to assemble, each clad in fine garments and wearing solemn expressions. Corvin watched them from a distance, unable to contain his revulsion. These spectators came seeking the spectacle of a privileged man's offering, eager to see how Harrington would seal his standing among them. An hour before sunset, Baltus announced that it was time. Corvin and two other stable hands were ordered to retrieve Stormcaller from his stall and escort him to the courtyard. Each man gripped a length of rope, hearts pounding in unison as they approached the horse. Stormcaller stood in a corner, muscles tense under a thin blanket. The moment the stable door creaked open, his ears pinned back, and he let out a low, distrustful rumble. Corvin swallowed hard, stepping forward with open hands. "Easy," he said softly, though he knew there was no real comfort to offer. The stallion rolled his eyes, shifting away. With the help of the others, Corvin slipped a halter over Stormcaller's head, mindful of the rope burns. Together, they coaxed him from the stall, step by reluctant step. Outside, the sky was an explosion of orange and pink, heralding the approach of night. Torchbearers lined the courtyard, forming a narrow pathway to the altar. A hush fell as Stormcaller emerged, flanked by anxious stable hands. Brother Zephram stood at the altar's side, arrayed in ceremonial robes. Baltus waited in the center, chin lifted, posture rigid with pride. Over a dozen onlookers formed a semicircle, some murmuring prayers or commenting in hushed voices. At the horse's appearance, an uneasy stir ran through them. Stormcaller's dark coat shimmered with each labored movement, a reminder of his regal bearing. Yet ropes bound him, and each step seemed to echo with finality. Corvin fought the urge to drop the lead rope and let Stormcaller bolt, but he felt the weight of eyes upon him. Brother Zephram raised his arms, calling for silence. Incense smoke drifted over the courtyard, flickering in the torchlight. Baltus cleared his throat, addressing the gathering in a resonant tone. "Friends and peers, we stand here under the watchful eyes of old powers," he proclaimed. "May our offering appease them, ensuring prosperity for our fields." A murmur rippled through the crowd, though some faces betrayed discomfort. Zephram beckoned Corvin and the others to bring Stormcaller forward. Corvin's pulse hammered. He led the stallion until they stood before the altar. Stormcaller snorted, sidling away from the brazier's heat. From the corner of his eye, Corvin saw the sacrificial dagger resting on polished stone. Tension crackled in the air. Baltus Harrington stood behind the altar, hands clasped behind his back, as Brother Zephram began chanting the opening lines of the ceremony. The sweet, pungent smoke from the brazier drifted upward in spirals, stinging the eyes of those gathered. Stormcaller shifted anxiously, ears flicking at each murmur from the watchers, his muscles tensed in silent protest. Although no whip cracked across his flank, the ropes that bound him were enough to confirm his impending doom. Corvin, stationed at the horse's side, felt his stomach lurch each time the priest's solemn voice rose in invocation. The stableman's palm pressed gently against Stormcaller's trembling shoulder, as though to remind him that not every human in the courtyard wished him dead. Still, he dared not speak out loud. Every glance from Baltus or his retinue threatened to freeze him in place. Meanwhile, the hush enveloping them seemed to distort time, prolonging the stallion's last few minutes in a grotesque spectacle of wealth and power. Brother Zephram's chants mingled with the cloying perfume of incense, creating a haze that clouded the dais. Several of Baltus's wealthy associates stood nearby, murmuring among themselves about the audacity of this event. One or two gazed upon Stormcaller with faint pity, but most were more concerned with how Baltus would emerge from the ritual. A tall man in an embroidered vest shifted uncomfortably when Stormcaller stomped a hoof on the stone floor, the sound echoing like a distant drumbeat. Another, wearing a bright blue cravat, leaned forward with an unsettling curiosity in his eyes. Farther back, certain lesser landowners fidgeted, uneasy at being witness to a scene reminiscent of darker tales. A hush fell whenever Brother Zephram paused for breath, as if all awaited an otherworldly sign. The priest's voice rose again, slow and deliberate, intoning the need for a blood offering to ensure the field's prosperity. Corvin swallowed hard, his mouth dry. He noticed how Stormcaller's ears pressed flat, how the stallion's nostrils flared. Beneath a sheen of sweat, the horse's muscles quivered, poised for an escape that would not come. With each recitation of old incantations, tension coiled in Corvin's chest. He half expected Stormcaller to lash out, but exhaustion and rope burn had robbed him of strength. Instead, the horse's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. A swirl of smoke drifted past Baltus's face, emphasizing the rigid lines of his jaw. Corvin could practically feel the man's triumph thrumming in the air. This was his moment, a testament to his power. Slowly, Brother Zephram raised the gilded dagger. Its blade caught the torchlight, flashing like a star about to fall. "Under the witness of these gathered," he announced, "we make an offering. May the land be fertile, and may those who show devotion receive the favor of ancient guardians." The words rang out in the courtyard, each syllable weighted with finality. Corvin's heart thundered. He wanted to cry out, to yank Stormcaller away, but each muscle in his body felt paralyzed by the knowledge that rebellion could seal not only his own fate, but also the stallion's. The circle of onlookers watched, entranced by the macabre drama unfolding before them. Brother Zephram stepped forward. Standing at Stormcaller's flank, he placed the dagger's tip near the base of the stallion's neck, just above where the rope had chafed the skin raw. At that contact, Stormcaller startled, shifting sideways with a sharp snort. Corvin, mouth open but voiceless, braced his hands against the horse's side, trying to calm him. Sweat beaded on Corvin's temple as he dared to look Baltus in the eye. For an instant, something in the older man's face suggested hesitation, a flicker of tension that cracked his mask. Then Baltus nodded at Zephram, a silent command to finish the act. Before the blade could pierce flesh, a sudden cry rose from behind the hedges. Heads turned as a young boy, no more than 12, came stumbling into view, nearly knocking over a wrought iron torch stand. His eyes were wide with alarm, and he shouted Baltus's name in a high, trembling voice. At first, none could make out his words through the pounding in their ears, but slowly, the meaning became clear. Men had arrived at the manor gates, claiming an urgent message. They insisted that Baltus come at once. A confused murmur rippled through the gathering. Brother Zephram held still, dagger half lowered, uncertain whether to interrupt a rite in progress. Baltus's expression darkened at the intrusion, but with half the eyes in the courtyard now turned toward him, he spat a curse under his breath and waved for the boy to speak. "Sir, they say," the child blurted between gasps, "they say a detachment of the magistrate's guard is on the road, heading this way. Something about investigating suspicious dealings. Something about farmland disputes and forced acquisitions." He seemed unsure of the details, but his panic was genuine. A shock coursed through the watchers. One or two landowners shifted guiltily, recalling rumors that Baltus's business practices were far from honorable. Another wave of murmuring spread, each person guessing how a visit from the magistrate might affect them. Baltus's lips tightened into a thin line. He barked at the boy to remain silent, then turned to Brother Zephram, jerking his chin at Stormcaller. "Finish quickly," he snapped. "I refuse to let bureaucrats disturb me now." Brother Zephram pressed his lips together, uncertain. Perhaps he sensed that the mood had changed, that the carefully orchestrated mystique was slipping away. The watchers fidgeted, some outright uneasy with the suggestion that the law might soon intrude on Harrington Manor. Meanwhile, Stormcaller exhaled in sharp bursts, responding to Corvin's frantic attempts to keep him steady. The stableman could hardly believe the sudden shift. Part of him hoped the magistrate's arrival would disrupt the sacrifice entirely, while another part feared Baltus's reaction if forced to abandon his plan. A ring of tension circled them, crackling like energy before a storm. The priest steadied the dagger, stepping closer to Stormcaller's neck. "We complete this in the old tradition," he intoned, though the urgency had replaced any solemn grace. The circle of onlookers formed again, some peering nervously over their shoulders for any sign of approaching riders. Each second felt drawn out, the courtyard illuminated by flickering torches that swayed in the stirring wind. Corvin clenched his jaw, tears pricking his eyes at the thought of losing Stormcaller after everything that had happened. The horse's muzzle quivered and his ears lay flat. Time seemed to slow as the dagger poised to descend. Suddenly, a resounding clang echoed from the manor's gate, followed by the clatter of hooves on stone. Gasps erupted from the gathered watchers. Through the parted hedges, one could see the faint glow of torches bobbing beyond the gate, and a flurry of unfamiliar voices calling demands. The magistrate's men had arrived, bold as day, ignoring Harrington's preference for secrecy. Baltus spat a furious oath. With the ceremony teetering on the brink of completion, he glanced at Brother Zephram with a silent ultimatum. The priest raised the blade once more, eyes flickering with both duty and fear. In that charged moment, Corvin's body surged into motion before his mind fully grasped his intent. He lunged between the priest and Stormcaller, pushing Zephram's arm aside. "Stop!" he yelled, voice echoing off the courtyard walls. An explosion of astonished cries rose from onlookers. Brother Zephram stumbled, nearly losing grip of the dagger. Baltus roared Corvin's name, fury twisting his face. Somewhere in the confusion, Stormcaller jerked backward, hooves scraping on the stone as though he too sensed a final chance at reprieve. "Get out of the way!" Baltus thundered, his tone vibrating with lethal menace. But Corvin's heart hammered with a flood of courage born of desperation. All the guilt, all the sleepless nights, surged into a single defiant act. He stood firm, arms outstretched as if his slight frame could shield the horse from the entire world. Through the blur of torchlight and swirling smoke, he saw watchers gawping, some in alarm, others with perplexed admiration. Brother Zephram, rattled, tried to regain composure. He raised the dagger again, but his hand shook. "This is sacrilege," he cried, voice cracking. "Stand aside or you'll doom the harvest, boy." Baltus stepped forward, murder in his eyes. At that instant, the sound of the gate rattling open carried across the courtyard. Multiple figures in the uniform of the magistrate's guard poured in, calling for an immediate halt to any ceremony. Two men in plumed helmets advanced, swords at their hips, While a smaller figure in official robes strode at their center, chaos reigned. The watchers parted to make room, uncertain whether to remain for the spectacle or flee. Baltus spat orders at his own guards, who looked torn between defending their master and obeying the law. Stormcaller sidled sideways, ropes tangling around his legs as he tried to avoid the new commotion. Corvin stayed close, determined not to let the horse become a casualty of the confusion. Sweat ran down Corvin's brow as Baltus and the lead official locked eyes. Neither flinched. "Baltus Harrington," the official barked, voice carrying authority. "We're here under the magistrate's writ. You stand accused of illegal seizure of land and cruelty charges. We have cause to investigate further." At those words, a collective ripple of shock spread through the courtyard. The official's eyes flicked to the altar, the brazier's smoke swirling around the half-completed arrangement. "It appears we're not too late to interrupt something." A faint note of disapproval hardened his tone. Baltus drew himself up, fists clenched. "How dare you barge onto my property," he snarled, "spewing vile accusations while I tend to private matters." His voice had an unsteady edge, forced to maintain composure amid a scene spiraling beyond his control. The official did not back down. "Private or not, we have a responsibility. There have been formal complaints regarding your ceremonies. Our arrival was delayed, but we come now with full backing of the local council." He gestured at the ring of ropes around Stormcaller, the dagger in Zephram's trembling hand. "Care to explain?" Brother Zephram glanced at Baltus for guidance. Baltus's eyes burned with cold fury. "I owe no explanation for the traditions of my estate," he growled. "This is a legitimate offering to secure a bountiful harvest. Unless the magistrate believes in interfering with piety." The official's features remained unreadable, but his guard stepped forward, scanning Stormcaller's bruises and rope burns. Corvin sensed an opening. He cleared his throat, voice trembling, and spoke in front of them all. "This horse, Stormcaller, was never a willing offering. He was taken by force, nearly run to death in the forest. This is no pious act. It's cruelty." An uneasy hush followed. Some of the watchers dared to nod agreement. Others hid behind sullen frowns. Baltus whirled on Corvin, face livid. "You dare betray me," he hissed, voice thick with menace. Corvin wavered but refused to step back. Every muscle in his body quaked, yet a fierce protectiveness fueled him. "I speak the truth," he whispered. "That can't be denied." The official eyed Corvin, noticing the horse's trembling flank and the halter cuts on its muzzle. Then he eyed Baltus again, suspicion etched across his features. Brother Zephram let the dagger drop to his side, sensing that any further attempt to continue the sacrifice would incite immediate conflict with the guard. Torchlight danced on the yard's flagstones, each breath from Stormcaller stirring the air like a silent plea. Tension coiled tight, awaiting the official's judgment. Baltus's mouth twitched in a snarl, but even he recognized that attacking a law officer would be a grave miscalculation. So he kept silent, seething as the official walked a slow circle around Stormcaller, carefully observing the horse's condition. "At the very least," the official said at last, voice resonating with quiet authority, "this ceremony must cease until our investigation is complete. The horse is to remain unharmed." Baltus gave a low, dangerous laugh. "And you think you can command me?" The official's guard took a subtle step forward, steel glinting at their belts, an unmistakable warning. The official replied calmly, "Yes, if the magistrate's seal means anything in this land. Harm this animal in our presence, and you risk a formal charge of felony cruelty, on top of your other alleged infractions." Baltus looked ready to explode. For a moment, Corvin feared he might brandish a weapon or call his own men to arms. The watchers, transfixed, remained silent, uncertain whose side to take. Stormcaller quivered, nearly collapsing from stress. Corvin stayed close, hoping to keep the stallion calm. Then, with visible effort, Baltus forced out a clipped exhale and spat on the ground. "Take your investigation," he said. "Waste your time. But my estate is mine to govern. When your meddling is over, we'll see who truly holds power." Brothers Ephraim cast a confused look between them. He understood the ceremony was ruined, at least for now. That acknowledgement sank in, and he lowered the dagger fully, setting it aside on the altar. A creeping sense of relief washed through Corvin. Stormcaller had been spared, at least for this moment. The officials and guards parted, signaling that the gathering should disperse. Some onlookers left hastily, disturbed by the abrupt confrontation. Others lingered, trading gossip in hushed tones. Baltus stood rigid, fists tight at his sides, refusing to move. But the official turned to Corvin. "See that the horse is cared for, and ensure no further harm comes to him," he ordered, glancing sternly at Baltus. "That is a direct mandate." Corvin nodded with trembling gratitude. Relief fluttered in his chest, though fear still lingered. The guard's presence might hold Baltus at bay for a short while. But once they concluded their investigation, the stallion's fate would still hang by a thread. Baltus, humiliated in front of peers, would be more dangerous than ever. Yet for the first time, hope ignited in Corvin's heart. If he could keep Stormcaller safe long enough for the magistrate's men to gather evidence, perhaps the stallion could escape a final, merciless end. He turned to guide Stormcaller away from the altar. The horse followed with trembling steps, the crowd parting like water before them. Overhead, clouds churned in the dusky sky, as though nature itself recognized a reprieve had been granted. In that fragile pause, the promise of freedom flickered in Stormcaller's wary eyes, signaling that their battle was not yet over. Inside Harrington Manor, the shock of the magistrate's intervention lingered long after the officials dispersed to examine Baltus's ledgers and interview startled servants. The courtyard still smelled of incense and overturned brazier ash, a silent testament to the ceremony that had nearly concluded in blood. Most of the spectators had either fled in haste or retreated to hushed corners, unwilling to witness further strife. Meanwhile, Corvin guided Stormcaller back to the stables under the watchful eye of 2 guards posted by the official's orders. Though the horse trembled and stumbled, he seemed to sense a fragile reprieve from his terrible fate. Corvin's heart pounded, relief intermingling with dread. Baltus, enraged, had retreated to his study, slamming doors behind him. The stableman knew this was only a temporary truce, and that once the magistrate concluded his business, Baltus might still try to finish what he had begun. A thick tension clung to every corridor. Maids hurried past with their eyes lowered, and footmen exchanged uneasy glances whenever the echo of Baltus's voice carried from behind the locked study door. Rumors spread quickly that the magistrate had uncovered documents revealing illegal pressures to force local farmers into selling parcels of land below value. Others whispered that there might be evidence of cruelty complaints filed anonymously over the years, including testimonies about the lavish care demanded for prize horses, followed by merciless punishments for any animal failing to please. Corvin overheard fragments of these discussions while tending to Stormcaller in the stable's dim lantern light. The horse stood in a large stall, guarded by one of the official's men named Quinn. Quinn was a sturdy figure in plain uniform, his posture firm yet not unkind as he watched Corvin stroke the stallion's neck. "Better keep him calm," Quinn remarked, his tone softened by empathy. "From what I've heard, this beast has seen more than enough fear for one lifetime." Corvin nodded, murmuring a thanks. He rinsed Stormcaller's wounds again, mindful of how the ropes had cut into the stallion's flesh. Though Stormcaller still trembled, he allowed the gentle touches, as though realizing Corvin was no longer an enemy. Outside, the red glow of sunset filtered through stable windows, gilding the dust motes that danced in the gloom. The next few hours would prove critical. If the magistrate's guard decided to remain on the property overnight, Stormcaller might survive until morning, but if they left too soon, Baltus could reclaim his brutal plan under cover of darkness. Footsteps clacked on the stable walkway, and Corvin spotted Baker and Reeves approaching. Both wore haggard expressions as though the day's turmoil had aged them. Reeves cast an anxious glance at Quinn's uniform and cleared his throat. "Corvin," he said in a hushed voice, "we're hearing all sorts of rumors. Some say Baltus is furious enough to fight the guard. Others say he's going to let them snoop around, then bribe them into leaving." Baker stood behind him, arms folded. "We just want to know if the horse is truly safe. We're not looking for trouble, but—" His voice trailed off. Corvin read the guilt in their eyes, remembering how they had helped rope Stormcaller, yet he also recognized they were only following orders, trapped in Baltus's orbit much like he was. "I'm doing what I can," Corvin answered quietly. "Stormcaller's under watch by the magistrate's men, so for now he's off limits." Quinn crossed his arms, observing the brief exchange without interference. Baker and Reeves nodded, relief flickering across their faces. A silent understanding passed among them that this night might spark a final confrontation. If Baltus succeeded in driving away the magistrate's oversight, he would doubtless resume the sacrifice or unleash some new punishment on Stormcaller for daring to escape. With a deep sigh, Baker and Reeves returned to their tasks, leaving Corvin to check the stallion's bandages once more. Stormcaller breathed heavily, eyes half-lidded. Corvin stroked the horse's muzzle, feeling a glimmer of hope. If the guards remained, perhaps a miracle would blossom from the chaos. Nightfall enveloped the estate. Lanterns flickered in hallways and outside corridors as a handful of the magistrate's men accompanied an investigator through the manor, requesting books and scrolls from Baltus's stewards. Now and then, an argument erupted behind closed doors, carrying the landowner's furious tone. Corvin decided he needed clarity about the timeline. If the officials intended to leave, he must find a way to keep Stormcaller safe. He could not risk letting the stallion be left defenseless once the guard departed. Bracing himself, Corvin gently handed Stormcaller's lead rope to Quinn and slipped out of the stable, determined to learn more. The manor interior felt eerily hushed, as though bracing for an explosion of tempers. 2 more guards stood by the main staircase, hands on their sword hilts. Corvin approached, explaining that he worked in the stable and needed to speak with whomever was in charge. One guard frowned, then motioned him upstairs. Through an open door at the end of the corridor, Corvin spied the official who had confronted Baltus during the ceremony. Seated at a desk piled with papers, the man pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Outside the window, the moon hovered low, illuminating the desk in pale light. Corvin knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Come in," the official said, exhaling. He glanced up, regarding Corvin with a weariness that suggested he had questioned a parade of people already. "You're the stableman who spoke out, correct? Corvin, was it?" Corvin dipped his head. "Yes. I'm sorry to intrude. I just need to know if you intend to stay through the night. The horse, Stormcaller, he's vulnerable." The official's eyes flickered with recognition. "We do plan to remain while we gather evidence," he answered. "Your master has shown reluctance in cooperating, so we'll keep watch until we can be certain nothing else untoward occurs." He gestured at the stacks of notes. "Based on what we've seen, there are serious allegations of land theft and intimidation. The cruelty matter is also significant. We have to document everything meticulously." Relief flooded Corvin's chest. "Thank you," he breathed. "Baltus is dangerous when cornered. If not for your guard, I fear he'd complete the sacrifice by dawn." The official nodded grimly, rubbing his temple. "I believe you. That's why we'll keep a close eye. Rest assured, Stormcaller isn't going anywhere tonight." Corvin thanked him again, his voice trembling with gratitude. The official eyed him curiously. "You risked your position by intervening," he said quietly. "I hope you understand the consequences." Corvin bowed his head. "I can't regret it," he whispered. "I couldn't watch that horse die." Moments later, Corvin made his way back downstairs, feeling a tentative spark of optimism. The guard presence would endure at least until morning, granting Stormcaller time to heal a bit. But he also knew Baltus's anger had only intensified. A man like Harrington would not accept humiliation lightly. Passing a pair of servants on his way to the courtyard, Corvin overheard them discussing a rumor that Baltus had locked himself in his study, refusing supper or conversation, seething in private. They feared he might lash out unexpectedly. Corvin quickened his pace, eager to remain near Stormcaller. Stepping into the stable's lantern-lit hush, Corvin found Quinn still by the stall door. The soldier greeted him with a nod. "All quiet," Quinn said. "Horse is calm enough, though he spooks at sudden sounds." Corvin peered inside. Stormcaller stood with lowered head, feasting on a small measure of grain. The tension in the stallion's posture seemed slightly eased, as though he sensed the ceremony had been postponed. Corvin slipped inside, carefully running his fingers along the horse's flank. Stormcaller quivered, but did not pull away. "We have a window of time," Corvin murmured mostly to himself. "Let's use it well." He began a more thorough grooming, using a soft brush to rid the horse's coat of dried sweat and ash. With delicate care, he cleaned the rope burns, applying salve once more. Quinn watched with interest, occasionally asking about Stormcaller's history. Corvin explained how the stallion had once been Harrington Manor's pride, winning races and impressing visitors. Over time, Baltus's obsession with prestige had morphed into a willingness to sacrifice even Stormcaller's life in pursuit of some twisted reverence. As they spoke, Corvin felt an unexpected kinship with the soldier, two strangers united by empathy for a suffering creature. The rhythmic hush of the grooming brush soothed them both. Hours slipped by. Outside, the hush of night deepened. Eventually, Quinn stretched his arms, yawning. "We'll rotate in the morning," he said. "Until then, I'll stay. I doubt Harrington can muster the nerve to challenge the magistrate outright while we stand guard." Corvin nodded, but worry lingered in his eyes. "He's cunning," he warned softly. "He might bide his time. Once you and the others leave, I'm not sure anything will stop him." Quinn exhaled, fatigue apparent in his voice. "One battle at a time. The official will do his best to hold Harrington accountable if the evidence suffices." Corvin crouched near Stormcaller's front legs, checking for signs of swelling. The stallion nudged him with a soft snort, a faint gesture of trust. Corvin gently stroked the horse's muzzle, remembering how close he had come to losing him. Stormcaller had risked everything to escape, only to be dragged back. Yet fate had intervened just before the blade fell. That slender margin gave Corvin hope that perhaps the future was not set in stone. If the law could forestall Baltus's cruelty, maybe Corvin could one day lead Stormcaller to a safer life. Sleep tugged at his eyelids, but he refused to leave the stall, convinced the horse needed a friend at his side. Through the stable door, he glimpsed occasional movement from the courtyard, the flicker of patrol lanterns, a hush of boots on gravel. The officials remained vigilant. Now and then, raised voices echoed from the main house, but there were no more attempts to continue the sacrifice. For that night, Stormcaller would live in uneasy peace. Near midnight, Quinn urged Corvin to catch some sleep in the loft above the stable. Corvin eventually agreed, promising to awaken at the slightest disturbance. He climbed the wooden ladder to the loft, unrolling a thin blanket over a mound of straw. Though discomfort pricked his limbs, he found an unexpected calm in hearing Stormcaller's gentle snorts below. Better here than in an empty bedroom, after all. The hours stretched and Corvin drifted in and out of fitful dreams. Fragments of the day replayed, the incense smoke swirling near Stormcaller's flank, the flash of the dagger, and his own sudden surge of courage. Each time he jolted awake, heart pounding in the darkness. Beneath him, the stall occasionally rustled. Once, Stormcaller whickered softly, rousing Corvin to peer over the loft's edge, but everything remained still. Quinn stood near the door, lamp in hand, unwavering in his task. Comforted by that sight, Corvin let his eyes close again, uncertain what tomorrow would bring, but clinging to the fragile belief that the horse now had allies. Dawn finally broke in a wash of pale light, leaking through the stable windows. Corvin stretched, stiff from the makeshift bed, and quickly descended to check on Stormcaller. The stallion blinked at him, calmer but still guarded, ears twisting as if listening for any threat. Quinn had moved outside, presumably to meet the next watch or speak with his superior. Alone, Corvin carefully offered Stormcaller fresh water. The horse drank with slow, deliberate sips. A new day had come, and with it, the threat of fresh upheaval. Though for now they were still alive, bound together by the simple defiance of having prevented a ritual's bloody conclusion. Corvin rested his forehead against the warm curve of Stormcaller's neck, closing his eyes. "We're not safe yet," he whispered, "but we'll face whatever happens next side by side." The morning sun tinted Harrington Manor's courtyard with slanting gold, illuminating a hush that felt ready to shatter. Corvin, having scarcely slept, recalled every detail of the previous day. The half-completed sacrifice, the magistrate's sudden arrival, and Baltus's seething wrath. Now, Stormcaller remained stabled under the watchful eye of the official's men, battered yet alive. The guard named Quinn had stood vigil all night, ensuring no hidden attempts to harm the horse. Throughout the estate, a grim sense of anticipation prevailed. Servants whispered that Baltus might attempt bribes or intimidation to dismiss the charges. Corvin lingered by Stormcaller's stall, stroking the stallion's muzzle, praying the magistrate's watch would hold long enough for justice to triumph. Above them, dawn's first rays sparkled, revealing the tension etched in every corner, like a warning. While crows cawed among the treetops, the official leading the investigation convened a small gathering in the manor's drawing room. He presented evidence of Baltus's coerced land acquisitions and flagged records suggesting cruelty toward livestock. Meanwhile, Corvin stayed in the stable, comforting Stormcaller, whose left foreleg bore harsh rope burns. Quinn stood guard, exchanging watch shifts with fellow officers. Rumors spread that Baltus had locked himself away in his study, raging at every knock. A few staff members, emboldened by the magistrate's presence, whispered about seeing the horse bleed on the altar's stone. Their testimonies buttressed Corvin's account. Hour by hour, tensions rose. The official hinted that formal charges would be filed soon, forcing Baltus to appear before the local tribunal. Nightfall promised further confrontation ahead and potential outright violence ahead. Despite the chaos, Stormcaller's condition slowly improved. Corvin replaced frayed ropes with a padded halter, careful not to provoke fresh wounds. Each gentle stroke reminded the stallion of quieter mornings before cruelty overshadowed their bond. Outside, watchers muttered that Harrington's prestige was crumbling under the weight of official scrutiny. Some predicted he'd flee to avoid arrest. Others believed he would bribe key witnesses. After a midday meal, Corvin discovered an unexpected ally in Quinn, who admired Corvin's loyalty. Together, they agreed to remain near Stormcaller whenever possible. "If Baltus tries anything again," Quinn vowed, "he'll face my sword." Still, Corvin's worry grew each time he imagined the guards leaving. Without oversight, Baltus's revenge would be swift. Twilight descended, carrying echoes of uncertain resolution and a fear that haunted Corvin's mind. As dusk arrived, the official convened one last meeting in Harrington's library, finalizing reports to be delivered at the tribunal. Corvin remained in the stable, too tense to eat. Stormcaller pawed restlessly, ears flicking at every clatter. Quinn assured Corvin the guard would stay the night, then depart at first light. That news unsettled him. Once the official left, Harrington might reclaim power. Past midnight, Corvin dozed in the loft. The stable doors creaked open. Jolting awake, he saw Baltus slipping in with 2 men, rope and mallet in hand. Heart-pounding, Corvin scrambled down, placing himself between Stormcaller and the intruders. A furious standoff ensued, but Quinn's timely intervention forced Harrington to retreat. The hush that followed felt like a sign. Tomorrow would decide everything for horse and man. Sunrise found the estate in suspense. Guards loaded papers and evidence into saddlebags, preparing to depart. Baltus sulked in his study, refusing breakfast. Servants wandered with downcast eyes, sensing an inevitable showdown. Corvin rose early, brushing Stormcaller's mane while the stallion nosed his shoulder. Quinn, finishing his shift, informed Corvin that their superior would hand the ledger files to the tribunal. "We'll leave 2 men behind for a few days," Quinn said, "but I can't promise permanent protection." Corvin's chest tightened at the thought. He murmured a prayer that the looming trial would strip Baltus of authority. Outside, the official mounted his horse, announcing that the wheels of justice had begun turning. Yet Corvin felt no relief. Only the quiet dread of waiting for Harrington's next strike like a storm. Throughout that day, Baltus prowled the manor with a dangerous glint in his eye. Word arrived that local farmers, once frightened, had openly testified to intimidation. In response, Baltus threatened any servant caught assisting the officials. Corvin kept Stormcaller confined, hoping the 2 remaining guards would deter immediate violence. Tensions escalated toward evening when a messenger brought news. The tribunal had scheduled a preliminary hearing in 3 days. If Baltus lost his temper, he might ruin whatever influence he still possessed. Determined to cling to power, Harrington grudgingly stayed his hand. For now. Corvin, however, sensed Baltus's hatred smoldering. Stormcaller grew restless, pawing the straw whenever footsteps approached. As night fell again, the stable seemed a haven. Corvin whispered reassurances to the horse, praying dawn would bring some resolution at last. Come morning, Harrington's lawyer arrived, hoping to dissuade the tribunal from imposing an immediate injunction. Corvin overheard arguments in the corridor, phrases like unfounded accusations and no direct evidence of cruelty. Yet the official's documents painted a damning portrait, and witness accounts continued piling up. Outside, Stormcaller nickered anxiously, unsettled by the tension. Corvin spoke softly, letting the stallion rub a tired muzzle against his shirt. Quinn mentioned that, should the court rule against Baltus, Stormcaller could be confiscated, maybe placed in protective custody. Corvin dared hope he might be allowed to take the horse away from Harrington Manor forever. Meanwhile, Baltus prowled about, refusing to meet Corvin's eyes, though the malice in his posture spoke volumes. A final confrontation felt imminent, overshadowing every breath and devouring all hope completely. That evening, a courier arrived from the tribunal with official summons for Baltus. Servants reported hearing him hurl a goblet against the wall in rage. Corvin, fetching supplies in the hallway, caught a glimpse of Harrington's contorted face, sweat beading his brow, hands trembling with fury. Meanwhile, in the stable, Stormcaller let Corvin lift each hoof to check for stones. The routine gesture calmed them both. Quinn stood guard, aware that Harrington's desperation might spark another midnight assault. At supper, rumors abounded that Harrington's funds were dwindling. Fewer allies openly supported him now. Corvin stayed beside Stormcaller until well after dark, vowing to remain vigilant. The stallion slept fitfully, muscles twitching as though remembering the harrowing chase. Morning would bring fresh danger or, with luck, a path to freedom at last. Dawn revealed a changed landscape. 2 tribunal representatives arrived unexpectedly, flanked by armed constables. They announced a preliminary injunction. Pending Baltus's hearing, Stormcaller would be relinquished. A hush fell across the courtyard. Harrington, pale and furious, demanded they revoke the order, but the officials stood firm, citing testimonies and evidence of neglect. Corvin's heart pounded as they declared Stormcaller a ward of the council until final judgment. Unable to defy them outright, Baltus hurled insults, but Quinn and the constables blocked his path. With numb disbelief, Corvin realized Stormcaller was finally free from Harrington's hand. In a swirl of shock and relief, the stallion was led from the stable, ropes removed. Above the manor's spires, clouds parted, bathing everything in a gentle, promising light. Hope sparked anew in every heartbeat. Moments later, Quinn approached Corvin, explaining that the council sought a guardian for Stormcaller until a court ruling. "You've shown your devotion," he said. "They're offering you custody." Emotion choked Corvin's reply. With trembling hands, he accepted. The stallion pressed a velvet muzzle against Corvin's chest as though sensing fate's kindness at last. Meanwhile, Baltus raged in the background, promising vengeance once the hearing ended. Yet no threat could overshadow Corvin's relief. Leading Stormcaller beyond Harrington's gates, he felt the morning sun on his face like a benediction. Freed from the altar, the black horse tossed his mane, striding forward without fear. Each hoofbeat resonated with a promise of renewal. Corvin vowed never again would Stormcaller face a cruel blade. The future beckoned, bright and unbroken. A new beginning dawned.